Question number 2, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by his statement last week that, quote, the government has to tighten its belt and get on top of the issues? We're doing that in a responsible way.
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yes.
The Honourable Leader of the
Mr.
Opposition.
Speaker, what action will the Prime Minister take to help the iconic Line 7 clothing company, given his inconsistent approach in doing nothing to help another iconic clothing company, Lane Walker Rudkin, but promising or boasting last week in the House that we have saved an iconic company in reference to Fisher and Paykel?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, well, I'm glad the Leader of the Opposition raised the last bit at the end of his question, because when I did try stand up and do something for Fisher and Paykel Appliances, the Leader of the Opposition bagged me. They're actually a company that went on the 9-day fortnight and has managed to sort out its financial position from there. In relation to Line 7, the government has had no approach from the company. Obviously, well, pay attention. You know, like, I'm giving you the answer if you want it. We're quite happy if the company wants to approach us. Of course, we'll look at the circumstances, but it is worth remembering that Line 7, 19 years ago, was bought out of recession, and if this company is to continue, I hope that it can be bought out of recession as well, because of course, receivership. Sorry, because of course, this company employs 100 people, and we don't want to see it lost.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Why did the Prime Minister, Bill English and Paula Bennett all refuse to front up to the TVNZ programme Sunday last week to explain why they had axed enterprising communities, given the fact that that programme, Enterprising Communities, has a proven track record of success in getting young people into work and training?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware of the requests I get on a daily basis from media because, well, I'm not, because I get a lot of them. But what I can say in relation to the community enterprise scheme is, by and large, it was set up for 3 years of funding. At the end of that, the schemes were meant to be sustainable. The vast bulk of them have not been. In the case of Otrahonga, that has been successful. We acknowledge that. They got an additional 1 year's funding, and in all likelihood they will be funded in the future when their funding matures in November.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, why did he axe Enterprising Communities, which did have a proven track record of success, while he's found $35 million for boot camps, which have a proven track record of failure?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, well, firstly, I wouldn't agree with the Leader of the Opposition in relation to this first statement he made. But well, it was 3-year funding that was meant to be sustainable. It didn't prove to be sustainable. But I'm interested in the Leader of the Opposition saying that he doesn't think boot camps or programs that have a bit of structure or discipline to them are any good. Because, funnily enough, in 1996, this is what Phil Goff had to say. He said, quote, Labor would also encourage young offenders into the armed services to gain discipline, self-esteem and trade qualifications. That's the idea.
Ms. Tremain. Chris Tremain.
Supplementary to the Prime Minister. What other reports has he seen about government responses to tough economic conditions?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've seen a report from a minister of a previous government facing debt and the threat of credit downgrades who supported the decision to impose a surtax on older New Zealanders. And I quote, it is true that the Labor Party said that a Labor government would not cut superannuation. Frankly, to have sustained that point of view against all evidence would have been totally irresponsible. That statement was from none other than Phil Goff. Well, unlike that member, we are facing tough international times, but older New Zealanders can know that their super is safe under this government.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Supplementary question, if I can bring the Prime Minister back into the 21st century, Mr. Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition. Order. I want to hear the Leader of the Opposition's question.
Mr. Speaker, why did the government cut $2.5 million designed to provide therapy assistance to the most disabled kids in our community, while providing $35 million to help the most advantaged kids in our community going to private schools, when he claims that this budget was about helping the most vulnerable?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we cut the $2.5 million, I suppose, because we put an additional $51 million in. Actually, the greatest increase that's actually been seen for special needs kids. But you see, Mr. Speaker, the trouble with the Leader of the Opposition is you can't rely on any of the figures he uses in this House, because just last week he said in this House that a third of all new money, and I quote from him, going into tax cuts applies to just 3% of taxpayers. He said just the top 3%, he said. Well, actually, I thought that sounded a bit odd, so I went off to IRD and I asked him what the real number is. The real number is that 3.2% of taxpayers actually got 16%.
Point of order. This point of order being raised. The Honourable Darren Hughes.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition's question was about education matters. The Prime Minister is now giving us a recitation on revenue policy. There's no connection between the question and the answer.
The honourable member will note the primary question is very wide in what the primary question asked. I do accept the point, though, he made that the Leader of the Opposition's question was specifically about education matters, and I think the Prime Minister should probably just either conclude his answer right there. I take it he's concluded?
A point of order, Mr. Speaker. The question was very specific. Why did he cut $2.5 million from disabled kids? He went on at length about other matters. He never answered the question.
Well, actually, as I heard the Prime Minister, he disputed the allegation in the honourable member's question, because the Prime Minister, I recollect his answer, told the House that more money had been added to that funding. So by disputing the allegation made by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, I believe that is a very fair answer, is a real answer to the question.
Well, the supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, we'll have the $2.5 million back then. Does he stand by the statement made by his Associate Minister of Education, Heather Roy, that cutting $2.5 million, which she acknowledged had been cut, even if the Prime Minister won't, from severely disabled children would, quote, have no adverse effect on the children? Does he stand by that statement? And has he asked her why she's refused to front up to the parents and the kids of those severely disabled children to explain why those cuts have been made, and listen to the vicious effect that those cuts will have on those vulnerable children?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yes, because the Associate Minister knew that the government put $51 million extra in. That's why she was confident, a lot more confident than these numbers from the Leader of the Opposition, who just can't get it right when it comes to tax, and should be honest enough to admit he actually got it wrong and misled New Zealanders.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, how does the Prime Minister justify the budget for ministerial support and staffing services jumping by more than $1 million a month, from $1.844 million December to February 07-08 to $2.955 million a month December to February 08-09, when elsewhere in the public service he's cut staffing by more than 1,400?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad the Leader of the Opposition asked that question, because back in 2004-05, ministerial services budget was $45,518,000. In the last year of Labor, so that would be 4 years on, it rose to $63 million. And actually, this year it's going to be $61 million. Value for money on this side of the House.